A few weeks ago, a friend of mine sent me a direct message, and in it he said, "It boggles my mind how little we can speak without judgment." And when he said that, it really inspired me because I realized that as much as I have been talking about censorship, I haven't yet touched on the idea of self-censorship, which is essentially what he was saying, that a lot of people have perspectives and have opinions that are valuable to hear, but they're not putting them out there because they're scared of the backlash. Now, this is something that you can see across the political spectrum. Roughly half of all liberals feel the need to self-censor. Roughly 2/3 of moderates and roughly 3/4 of conservatives feel this. And so I'd like to talk today about how to reduce self-censorship, to have the courage to speak out, to have the wisdom to figure out who to talk to, who's going to result in a productive conversation, who's not, and how to move the conversation forward on a smaller scale. And that smaller scale is really the first thing I want to talk about. I would recommend starting with one-on-one conversations. I know I'm being pretty public, making YouTube videos, making blog posts, going on Facebook. This has stemmed from years of what I would call practice, of talking with people and getting an idea of how to present my own ideas in a rational, tactful, and respectful way, and listen to and really take into consideration other people's critiques of my ideas. I would suggest, actually, this is more than a suggestion. This is pretty much like a directive to you. If you are going to have a conversation about politics with someone with whom you disagree, you need to be open to having your own mind changed. I think that the idea between political conversations on a one-on-one scale is really the same as on a larger scale, which is that what you're trying to do is get an accurate understanding of the facts, see as many different perspectives as you can, consider different solutions, consider the benefits and drawbacks of each solution, and figure out what is likely to be the best way forward. And what this means is whoever you are talking to very likely has some thoughts that you may not have heard before. You know, that they may have a different perspective or a different idea of what is most important to consider, or they may have a criticism of what you thought was an airtight argument, and you need to listen to that and potentially either adjust your argument or acknowledge that there are weaknesses in it and there may be a better solution than what you've yet thought of. If you are not able to do this, do not go out there and have political conversations. You're going to make things worse. You're going to reflect poorly on your own political party and come across as ignorant and stubborn. And that is exactly what you do not want to do. If you can have that mindset of being open-minded and open to changing your own views, the next step is to find another person that has that same sort of mindset. And the way I would recommend doing that is just paying attention to their behavior in general, because if a person is antagonistic and stubborn and ignorant, it's usually not just with regard to politics. You can usually pick up on it in other places. For instance, if you know someone and they love talking, they love to hear their own opinions, but they don't seem good at listening, don't talk about politics with them. If you see someone that is just very inclined to take things personally, even when it's not personal, and to very quickly go on the attack and attack you personally, again, just don't mess with them. Leave them alone. They've got some personal work to do. That's not the right person to engage in conversation with. If you do find someone who you feel is generally an intelligent, rational, calm, tactful person, then I would say, yeah, go ahead, sort of test the waters and see about having a discussion. And when you have the discussion, I think the best place to start from is find what you can agree on. So to give one example, let's say you're talking about gun control. I don't think you're going to find anyone who's going to disagree on the idea that mass shootings are a problem, that if you are sending your child to school, that you want to feel assured that they are safe. So I would say if you could start by establishing, hey, this is what we all want. We want to keep our children safe. Here's what I think is the most effective way to keep our children safe and why. The other person can come in and say, okay, well, this is where I see the problems with what you're suggesting. It's not going far enough. It's going to have unintended consequences, what have you. But that way you're sort of working towards a shared goal, the shared goal of safety. So I would recommend doing that. And then also make sure you understand the stance of the person you're talking to. To use that same gun control example, if you go on this whole diatribe about why the government going and forcibly taking back people's guns won't work, and the person you're talking to doesn't even support that anyways, you're not doing anybody any favors. Figure out what they actually think. And after that, I would say question them as to why. Because if you can imagine being in their headspace, if someone is pushing back and saying, you're wrong, you're going to get defensive. And you're going to try and think of any argument you can to be like, no, I'm not wrong. But if instead of telling them you're wrong, you question them and say, well, how do you factor in this? Are you concerned about that? Blah, blah, blah. You're forcing them to take a look at their own views rather than you doing it for them. So if you're going to change another person's mind, the best way to do it is to push them to question themselves rather than you doing too much of the pushback and questioning. And the final thing I would just mention is you may find yourself in a situation where you do feel like the other person's almost like attacking you, that they're peppering you with a whole bunch of questions of like, well, how can you think that? And what about this? And what about that? And I would just tell you, that's kind of what you want, actually. If someone is asking you a bunch of questions and asking you to clarify what is your stance on this and how do you defend that, that's what you want. You want the platform to say, this is what I believe and why. And if this person brings up a legitimate point, that's still what you want. You're going to have the humility to say, hey, I hadn't really considered that. I don't know how to factor that in. I don't think the solution is completely scrapping what I said, but how would you suggest maybe adjusting my solution to make it better serve the safety of children? And then when you're having that conversation, you're just ending up, you're hearing their perspective, they're hearing yours. And I think you're going to leave the conversation probably not in complete agreement, but probably closer to the truth. And that's what you want. Is politics is not a binary, it's a spectrum. And if you and the other person can just sort of nudge one another along the spectrum to get closer to the most accurate understanding of what an issue is and how to solve it, that's wonderful.